with all of that, I'd like to introduce Beth Ridley.
Okay. Better that you caught that at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have to go through everything all over again. Anyways, good morning, everybody. Bryce, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Love talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. I'm also super passionate about simplifying and demystifying it. I know this is a topic that a lot of organizations are really investing in and leaning into, but it can also feel overwhelming. And how do you do this the right way so that it's not a check the box, but some of these principles become sustainable within the organization. So that's what I'm going to talk about. The first segment, I'm going to focus on basic fundamentals around diversity, equity, inclusion. Why does it matter? And things that you can do as leaders. Very simple things that you can do to start infusing these principles in your organizational cultures. And then Deidre is going to take it to the next level, and Deidre's amazing, so I'm so happy to be co-presenting with her. She's going to drive down deeper and talk about what are some things that you can do to engage all employees in your organization and to build an infrastructure to support some of this work. So I do have some slides which I'll switch to, and then I would like to keep this as conversational as possible, so feel free to just take yourself off mute and interrupt me. Definitely throw questions in chat. And Bryce, if you wouldn't mind maybe helping me monitor chat.
Absolutely, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, thanks, I appreciate that. And I'll also pause for questions throughout. And then at the end, we're gonna break you off into pairs, just so that you can practice internalizing and talking about some of these concepts, because I think it's important in order to be able to lead by example, you gotta put some thought into these as well. So I guess maybe before I switch to my slides, just by show of hands, I'm curious to know, or you can put an emoji on your screen. How many of you have maybe formal diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives or strategy that you're currently implementing in your organizations? Okay, a few people. And then is it fair to say the rest of you are interested, but sort of new and really thinking about where do you want to go with this?
Or informal, it's some informal.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, that helps me sort of calibrate how I want to present the information. Let me go to my screen. Okay, thumbs up, everybody can see what I'm sharing. All right, awesome. So yeah, these are, I think it's good to get just a basic grounding in key concepts and competencies. Oh, that's me. I guess I was supposed to have that up, Bryce, when you were talking about me. The first thing I want to share are the trends that I'm seeing around diversity, equity, inclusion, why clients are coming to me, and why I feel like organizations are embracing this work differently than they have before. So this is what I'm seeing, reasons why clients come to me for help. One is there has been an evolution of leadership due to leaders leading through a crisis, right? You've probably seen in yourself, like through the pandemic, you had to lead with more of a sense of empathy. We were really concerned about the health and well-being of our employees. Employees were scared, and we needed to show that we really cared about them as people first, not just as employees. And also, we had to be honest and vulnerable in the sense that we didn't have all the answers as leaders. And some transparency there that maybe we haven't led with a sense of vulnerability in the past. And the truth is, employees responded really, really well to this type of leadership. Studies show that most employees feel that their employers, their leaders, handled the pandemic really well because of leading from a place of empathy and being honest about what they knew and what they didn't know. And I think a lot of those principles that leaders gravitated towards during the pandemic are very much rooted in diversity, equity, inclusion, and hopefully you'll see why as I share more. Also, since the aftermath of the death of George Floyd, people are more interested in paying attention to social justice issues. These are the same people that show up for work every day. And so they really do want to see that their organizations care about these issues more than just a statement, that they really are bringing some of these values that impact the community to life, and using their power as employers, employees, and communities for good. New types of diversity are becoming more in the forefront at work. I think traditionally we're used to thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion focused on women, focused on people of color. But now there's another generation entering the workforce, Gen Z, and I like to say they're kind of crazy. At least that's what a lot of the CEOs who come to me are millennials. I'm a Gen X, so I would complain about millennials. Oh, they just don't have good work ethic. And now millennials are saying the same thing about Gen Z. So millennials are getting old when they start to think that people just don't do things the right way. But it's a new generation that's in the workforce now. I think gender identity and expression issues are more in the forefront, talking about it a lot more than we have in the past. Certainly emotional and mental health has come to the forefront. And now working style preferences. Companies are trying to figure out, well, what's our remote working policy? Because employees have shown that they can work productively at home and some like it better. So how do we accommodate different preferences around how people work at their best? And then it's just a competitive labor market. I think companies are really realizing that a differentiating factor for attracting and retaining talent is to have a diverse and inclusive approach. So you're casting a broader net, but then also you're really focusing on the culture as a differentiator. So these are the reasons why organizations and leaders are coming to me. But for me, this all adds up that D&I really is no longer an initiative. They're embracing these values as just the way that they intend to do business and approaching it as a new operating model. And I think that this represents sort of the new evolution of how, as a country, at least in the business sector, we're thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion. So when I first started working, D&I, actually there was no I, it was just diversity, really was more from a compliance lens. They would march us down to HR. We'd watch like a 20-minute video of what not to do or what not to say so that we don't get sued or, the company doesn't get sued. And that was your diversity training. Then I would say over the past decade, it's really been more focused on diversity and inclusion, but a lot of celebrating our differences. So setting up employee resource groups, acknowledging and recognizing different holidays, a focus on multicultural awareness. It can tend to feel a little initiative based, however, but I think rewarding nonetheless. But now I think organizations are seeing this is good for business long term, these principles, and they really bring out the best in everyone and lead to better business results. So I see companies embracing this not as oh, well, we got to do this, but how do we embrace these principles? Because we know it's good long term. So with that as the backdrop, the things that I want to cover in the 45 minutes that we have together, I'm just going to speak to some foundational concepts. When we say diversity, equity, inclusion, what do we actually really mean? The role that leaders play in this is really leading by example. So what does it mean to have inclusive leadership skills? How do you develop and demonstrate those? And then, of course, I like to put everybody to work. Don't just listen to what I say, but actually try and test some of these principles. So we're going to have you a short little exercise that you can do to put these principles into practice right away. Let me get to foundational concepts first, and then I'll pause and check in with everybody if you have any questions or if you want to put anything in chat. But okay, so I always like to start with the end in mind: diversity, equity, inclusion. Why does it matter? Like, what does it add up to at the end of the day? To me, those three words, if done correctly, really come together to create a culture of belonging. So belonging means that there's a sense of psychological safety. People feel more comfortable being themselves than worrying about how to fit in or afraid to speak up or be more authentic out of fear of retribution. So it can also be referred to as psychological safety. But a couple of things happen. There's like a real positive domino effect when there is a sense of belonging felt among employees. The first is the employees feel more comfortable being themselves at work. They're not hiding or over editing themselves, leaving chunks of themselves that they really identify with at home because they're either embarrassed or they don't feel that they feel like they would be misunderstood or excluded in some regard. When people feel more comfortable being their full selves at work, they are going to engage tapping into all the dimensions of diversity that make someone unique, their background, their life experience, their skill set, like how they really think. That's going to give you more diverse perspectives to inform decision making. When you look at decisions and opportunities from a broader lens, you naturally come up with better decisions that lead to more thoughtful outcomes. More thoughtful outcomes really creates this environment where the organization is doing well, but they're doing well in a way where everyone feels that they've had a contribution to those outcomes, which creates an environment that makes it easier to attract and retain and engage employees. So it really creates this virtuous cycle that's good for business. At this point, there's ample evidence that actually quantifies the benefits of belonging, from better decision making that leads to better business outcomes, and also creating an environment that it's easier to attract and retain top talent. So all of this has been quantified. So I think the business case for diversity, equity, inclusion is very strong. There's also a lot of evidence and research that shows when belonging is missing, what does that lead to? And that leads to a phenomenon that's called masking, which basically means employees downplay some aspects of themselves in order to fit in with the prevailing culture. What's interesting about masking is that 60% of employees experience masking. That's not 60% of women. That's not 60% of people of color. That's 60% of all employees, including white men. So I think it's important to realize that everyone benefits from investing in a culture of belonging, because everyone, or the majority of people, have experienced what it feels like to not fit in. And at the very least, you're not getting the most out of your people, because people are more worried about, saying the right thing, behaving in the right way, not standing out, working so hard to fit in. They're just not focused that much on their work. You want them focused less on how do they survive at work and more on the work itself. That's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario is that it can be extremely stressful, and it can lead to, time off from work for illness, or just not wanting to come to work. But it's also a big factor why people leave, especially your diverse talent. So getting to some fundamental concepts, like how does diversity, equity, inclusion come together to create this culture of belonging? The first thing is just to recognize when we talk about diversity, which are the differences that make us all unique, and differences make more of a difference in the workplace, but we need to take an inclusive and broad lens to diversity. Most often we focus on these primary dimensions of diversity because they're visible. Our age, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation. But the truth is, we are all made up of more than just the wrapper that we come in. And limiting this topic around diversity, equity, inclusion to just the primary dimensions of diversity does a couple things. One, you sort of overlook a lot more diversity that exists in the workplace, even if everybody looks the same. You're not tapping into, again, for better, more thoughtful decision making, unless you sort of mine and go underneath the covers, so to speak, to really dig into what really makes everyone tick and what's unique about them that we just haven't really asked about. That could be really helpful in terms of decision making in our culture. The second thing is, when you focus on diversity and you really have this focus on only the primary dimensions of diversity, a lot of times you reduce people, especially folks who may be in the minority compared to the majority community, to those dimensions of diversity. And that never feels good, to be reduced to one aspect of who someone is. So I like to say, as an African-American female, my race and my gender are really important to me. I also like to say the least interesting things about me. There is way more to me, and I don't appreciate being reduced to just what you think it means to be an African-American woman. And then the third reason is, when more people can see that this work benefits them, that they have a connection to this work, you just have more ambassadors. And this type of work to really get ingrained in the organization, in my opinion, it's all hands on deck. Everyone needs to be a part of this. Leaders definitely need to set the tone, but ultimately everyone needs to be a part of this. And when everyone can see, yeah, I can certainly relate to an aspect of me where I feel like I'm masked, or I've had experiences, even as a white man, where I might have been the only one or misunderstood. That doesn't feel good. I can appreciate where it wouldn't feel good for anyone. And how could I be a part of creating a culture where we have less of that? Inclusion, I want to just shed some light on inclusion. I think we use that word and not really understanding that there's degrees of inclusion, right? So I think we all get what it feels to be excluded, leaving someone out. We definitely want to avoid that. However, I think a lot of organizations fall in the trap of tolerance, disguised as inclusion, right? And that means that, you know, folks in the organization, they're aware of differences, but they tend to overemphasize the commonalities because that feels more comfortable. That's human nature, to gravitate towards what makes us, what is common, right? It happens a lot. You know, when you meet someone for the first time, you're sort of searching for what do you have in common? Like, oh, you went to the same college as me? Oh, what awesome. You have something to talk about. You know, your affinity bias kicks in a little bit because if they went to the same college as me, they got to be decent people. Or, oh, you have kids too, right? It feels good to find those commonalities. The problem is when we only stay in our comfort zone by overemphasizing commonalities, what about all the people who don't share those commonalities? They start feeling like they have to mask, or they can't talk about what's different about them. It's not valued or appreciated. So getting to belonging means that you move past you move past tolerance to a higher level of inclusion, which is that you are comfortable being uncomfortable even around differences that you disagree with, that are counter to your own belief, that don't reflect your own experience, because you believe in the inherent value in different perspectives and differences. For all the reasons that I described in the earlier slide, it leads to better, thoughtful decision making, better outcomes, and that sort of thing. That's what belonging really requires. So it does mean moving outside of our comfort zone. I guess the easiest way for me to explain it is, well, let me get to equity first, and then I'll tie it all together. So where does equity fit in? So equity is just recognizing that we all need different things. Equity is not equality. So equality is everybody gets the same thing. Equity is recognizing that we're all at different starting points, or we all need different things to succeed. And how can you flex your style in order to help everyone be successful based on what they need? A lot of people get tripped up with this word, but I think we practice equity all the time in our day-to-day without even thinking about it. So a great example is if we're taking a group picture, right? We're very accustomed to saying, okay, smaller people in the front, taller people in the back. Well, why? Because taller people have an advantage when it comes to picture taking. They can stand anywhere and probably be seen. They're not going to be blocked. But we invite the smaller people in the front. Did it require that we had to make adjustments? Absolutely. Did it require a little bit of thought and effort? Yes. But at the end of the day, it resulted in a better picture where everyone could be seen. So just think about that and how that translates to the workplace. And so how, in my opinion, an easy way to think about how diversity, equity, inclusion come together to create belonging is, you know, diversity and inclusion pretty much gets you to tolerance, because, you know, I think that sort of reflects the golden rule that we were all taught, right? Treat others the way that you would want to be treated, which is a really good starting point. That's very nice and polite. But it also assumes everybody wants to be treated the way that you want to be treated, and they don't. So the equity piece then is ask someone how they want to be treated, heaven forbid, but then be prepared for the answer, right? And if you can sort of flex your style to accommodate those kind of differences, even if they're differences that you're not used to, that's really how you get to belonging. Okay, so I threw a lot out there, but I want to just pause to see if this is resonating, making sense, and to check in if we have any questions so far before we move on. Any questions? Megan, I think you're on the treadmill. Am I right? I like that. Okay, resonating with everybody?
Yep.
Okay.
Can I just say something? This is Julie. I really like the emphasis on let's talk about and celebrate what makes us different versus yes, everyone, let's talk about our commonalities. I think that's just a reframe that I think is going to be really helpful for me. And also the whole idea of the golden rule, which always struck me as odd because that assumes everyone wants to be treated like me, and that's probably not true. So I appreciate that little message as well. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Well, you do raise a good point though, because I guess one thing I should also add in is there is a time and a place for commonalities, right? So differences without any type of commonality, quite frankly, can lead to dysfunction and discord. But as leaders, the good commonalities to focus on are shared mission, vision, goals, purpose. Right? You really want to hire people that believe and buy into those things. So that's the what, right? But where you should be open to differences is the how, and the different perspectives, ideas, thoughts that lead to those shared outcomes. So it's, yeah, you don't want to focus on commonalities like, you know, where you went to school, where you grew up, the degree that you have. That is what, you know, can create masking. But certainly you really do want to reinforce those unifying factors that give work purpose and meaning and have employees feel connected to that work. So thanks for sharing that. That raised a good point. Well, I will continue on, and then, okay, so talked about that. Okay, so, well, the role of leaders is to demonstrate these principles, right, in your day-to-day interactions with others, and also in your daily decision making. And what does that mean exactly? Well, I'd like to just say that as leaders, you know, when you step into a room, when you show up at work, every interaction, conversation at the water cooler, elevator ride with someone, you're setting a tone, which over time, daily interactions add up, contributes to the culture. You're doing that intentionally and unintentionally. A lot of times we're just not thinking about maybe how we come across in our interactions with other people. And depending on that, it could lead to adding up to a culture of exclusion or more likely tolerance, or ideally with more awareness, belonging. So I like to say inclusive leadership has different levels to it. So I'll explain this roadmap or this continuum of inclusive leadership skills, so you can sort of see what's better and maybe what we should all strive towards. So if and this all stems from just your natural comfort level around similarities and differences. So there's always differences that make us all uncomfortable because they're unfamiliar to us. It's our own blind spots. It's our own implicit biases that might be coming forward. So it's really a matter of how aware are you of these, and how comfortable being uncomfortable around certain differences are you willing to be, is the determining factor of how mature your inclusive leadership skills are. So in the lower end of maturity is if you just simply are unaware or uninterested in the differences around you. You just really don't care, don't put a lot of thought into it at all. I mean, on one hand, it could be you're not really coming with a lot of baggage, but on the other hand, again, you know, you start to make people feel that you're not interested in them or what makes them unique. That can lead to a culture of exclusion unintentionally. Some people have a polarization orientation around differences, which means that they see differences, but they heavily judge them. Usually that means that the things that make them unique, they look favorably on, and the things that are dimensions of diversity that are different to them, they may have a negative impression. I would say, for example, an organization that I had worked for previously really did this around introverts and extroverts. A lot of the leadership were extroverts. They really expected people to be able to speak on the spot, command a room. And those that were more introverts, they were quieter. They kind of took that quietness as not that bright. You know, if you don't have something to say right away, are all cylinders firing? And so that really created a sense of exclusion for those that didn't have that, you know, extrovert tendencies. Most people, and by the way, there is an assessment, a leadership self-assessment that I'm certified to do that tells you where your natural orientation is. And 65% of people who take that assessment fall in the minimization category. And that is You notice differences, but you tend to really focus on commonalities for all the reasons that we talked about before. That's just human nature. It feels more comfortable, and who wants to be uncomfortable? We're always looking for connections. Now, when you can break through minimization, and minimization, by the way, leads to a culture of tolerance. But when you can break through minimization as a leader and through more intentional efforts, just being more aware of how you carry yourself in a room, acceptance means that you value differences. You don't like them, perhaps. You don't understand them, perhaps, but you're willing to explore them and bring them forward because you know that there's value in diversity. And then adaptation is when you're really including that equity piece. You are willing to flex your own approach to create that environment that really bridges across all these differences so that everybody can be successful. So that's the continuum. And I would just maybe say, without doing the actual assessment, a good maybe way to gauge where you are as a leader is think about the last meeting that you were in that you conducted. And what was the tone of that meeting? Was it a meeting where maybe you started the meeting talking about the purpose of the meeting and how it fits in with the higher mission of the organization? Then did you speak last? Did you invite other people to share ideas? And was there a vibrant exchange of different ideas? I would say your tone as a leader, you are creating a culture of belonging. Or would you describe the meeting more as you just sort of jumped into the agenda? We got a lot to do. Maybe it was crickets. When you asked for feedback, nobody really spoke, or it took a long time for people to speak. Maybe you spoke first, and then all the other feedback that you got was doubling down in different ways of what you had said. Then I would say there could be room for improvement, and you might be unintentionally creating a culture of tolerance. So that might be a simple litmus test just to start looking inward. One of the biggest reasons why it's difficult to lead in a more inclusive approach, more beyond minimization, is our own biases and blind spots that we have that take root when we're not intentional. Lots of different biases that play at work, but two that are most common. And by the way, I just want to say, you've probably heard that we all have biases, and it's just a human, it's just a natural consequence of the human brain, right? We are processing so much information. We can't process all the information consciously. Much information we process unconsciously, subconsciously, and our brain takes shortcuts based on whatever it can pull from. And that is our past conversations, past experiences, not necessarily grounded in truth and reality, to plug in those holes. And then that's how we end up getting sort of a picture of something that we think is truth, but it's not really based, again, on necessarily fact. And because we can't have, as humans, all the experiences in the world, clearly our brain is helping us out by filling in those gaps. And that's where we think we're doing such a good job, but it's really our biases that are informing us rather than more thoughtful intention. But two biases that really play out at work are affinity bias, when you extend a favorable attitude towards someone because they share an aspect of you that you feel connected to. Classic example, like I've been saying, somebody went to the same university as you and you're interviewing them and they get to the top of the candidate list because they got to be smart. They went to the same school as me. And then confirmation bias is when we seek information to double down on what we already know or what we already believe. And again, we don't want to get outside of our comfort zone. No one wants to be wrong. So we will unknowingly look for that information to prove that we're right, because that feels better. So those are the things that get in the way of leading with a more inclusive, more thoughtful mindset that pushes you past minimization. So I want to get next into how to strengthen those leadership skills so that you can move up on that leadership continuum more towards interacting with others that creates a culture of belonging. But I will pause there first, because I know it can be a lot to digest, and just check in with any questions or comments so far. Nothing. Okay, making sense. Okay, I will keep going. Somebody please stop me if I'm losing you. Well, we all want to do better, and we all have the opportunity to do better. How can we bring these principles around diversity, equity, inclusion to life in our day-to-day so that when we show up, we're more intentionally creating a cultural belonging than not? 4 steps or 4 things to think about, and they're all actually very easy. The first is to be committed, be courageous, be curious, and be connected. I'll explain each one. The first is be committed, because you know what? You're not going to flex new muscles or try something new or practice new behaviors if it really doesn't matter to you. So you really want to think about like why this work matters. A couple of reflection questions that I think are really good to ultimately get to a sentence. I call it your DEI why. Why does investing in being a more inclusive leader matter to you? Why does it matter to the organization? And by the way, these skills are not just professional skills. Honestly, being able to be more comfortable around differences, seeking broader perspectives to inform you makes you smarter, more interesting. And those are all great qualities of a better parent, spouse, friend, neighbor, community member. So I think these are transferable skills that are worth investing in. But anyways, you have to decide for yourself, because it will require stepping outside of your comfort zone in some regards. So why does this work matter for you? Otherwise, truthfully, yeah, you've got other things to do. Moving on. So then the next one is be courageous. And that means being honest about the blind spots that we all have. One way, there's lots of ways to do that. There's tests that you can take to uncover implicit biases, but I like to say one way is just to reflect on who do you hang out with? When you have a choice, who do you spend time with? Not who you're forced to spend time with at work, but when you have a choice on your weekends, in your private time, who are you hanging out with? Better yet, who are you not hanging out with? So look for patterns of similarities and differences around many dimensions of diversity in your social circle. And that would give you a pretty good indication, like where you have differences that are missing or an over rotation on similarities could be some indications of where you've got blind spots and where you may want to make an effort to expose yourself to people with that dimension of diversity to round out your perspective and make sure that you're not falling back on limited data points that are not really based in reality. Then it's be curious, right? Well, the only way to start to chip away at our implicit biases and replace them with more empathy and understanding is to increase our data points around the human experience, which means you got to talk to more humans. And I think a lot of people are always looking for a shortcut here. Like, can't I read a book? Well, okay, you can. I'm not going to say don't read a book, but you know, the truth of the matter is, the best way to learn about life experiences that are not lived by you is to talk to people that have lived those life experiences, because everything is so nuanced. Nothing is, you know, packaged, you know, into one way. Humans are so incredibly complex. So talk to more of them, get to know more of them. And that's really the best way of starting to minimize some of our implicit biases. So it can be scary and weird and awkward, but I like to say these are 3 foolproof phrases that I've personally used in situations where I have the opportunity to talk to someone who, in some cases, I know we hold very different beliefs in the conversation. A lot of times we think everything that can go wrong, it'll spoil the relationship. It'll make it super awkward. I'll say something wrong and embarrass myself. So instead of thinking about everything that can go right, think about what can go. So instead of thinking about everything that could go wrong, rather think about what could go right. You could deepen a relationship. You could broaden your awareness. And in most cases, if you enter a conversation with true curiosity and compassion, it really can't go that bad. But use these 3 phrases to maybe lean into discovering something about someone who's different than you that is on your mind, but maybe you'd be too embarrassed to ask. So I always say, start with, I'm curious to know. It's a way of entering a conversation without any type of judgment. And then, of course, when someone starts talking, just say, tell me more. You ask them, allow them to elaborate in any way that's meaningful for them. And then thanks for sharing. And maybe you could reciprocate by sharing about something about you. Now, I was giving this talk once, and then someone paused me and said, oh, I want to try. And she said, Beth, I'm curious to know, what should I use? African American or Black, or I'm not exactly sure, like, what is the right phrase to use when I talk about people of my ethnicity. And so she practiced that, and I gave her from my perspective, I thought it was really good. And I gave her a lot of credit for being courageous in a group to do that. And then the only one qualifier I shared at the end was, be sure to not ask anyone to speak on behalf of a community or a group. The one thing I would say is, you should ask, Beth, what do you prefer? Black, African American, so forth, right? So just caution that. And actually, I thought it was a very good question. Frankly, no one had ever asked me that before. And I live with 4 other Black people, my husband, my 2 sons, and my daughter. And I went home that night and I asked them. Lo and behold, I got 4 different answers. Very interesting. So that's why I always say, read a book if you want, but nothing beats conversation, because we're all unique and different. And, if she had read a book and it said, use this, she'd have limited perspective, because that wasn't the case. Okay, so so those are some great communication tools to use, put in your toolkit. But also, I want to say that there's some communication guiding principles to keep in mind too, especially when you start having more challenging dialogue across differences. A couple things to keep in mind to make sure that these conversations are more productive and positive than not. The first is to keep in mind to seek to understand, not to agree. I think a lot of times we're conditioned to think if we're having a conversation, there is a winner and there is a loser. Someone is wrong and someone is right. But that is not the case. You are, practice not going into a conversation to argue or make your point. Just assume you can always learn even when you don't always agree. It's about broadening your perspective. Be sure to listen. I think as a society, we undervalue listening. Just listen. You don't always have to take action or even react. Sometimes when someone is telling you something, they actually don't want your opinion. They're just sharing from their perspective. It's fine to simply listen. I talked about this one, right? Make sure you only share from your perspective. You can only represent yourself. And also don't ask anyone to represent on behalf of a community. And then the last one that somehow popped up there early is believe what you learn. This is important. I think a lot of times when we hear something that is so different from our own experience, we tend to minimize it, or actually even sometimes think that it's not true. I catch myself saying that sometimes. People will tell me something, I'll be like, no way. I mean, then how does the other person feel? So just remember, all opinions are valid and should be respected. And I would also say another important thing is to remember no one person has the monopoly on the truth. Right? You may think that your way of thinking about something, your belief, is gospel. No one person has full monopoly on the truth. Just some things to keep in mind. And then the last thing, if you want to practice these principles in your day-to-day around diversity, equity, inclusion, right after we finish with our morning together, what can you do? I call them just everyday acts of inclusion. There are really some small things that you can do to show people that you have an interest in them, that you value and appreciate them as what makes them unique, right? These are super easy things to do. The hardest part is we get so busy in our day. We are always so go, 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 a bazillion things to do. We're always in execution mode. And that is, I appreciate that. But I think what distinguishes great leaders from good leaders is those leaders who can be a little bit disciplined around pausing and investing in people and being present with people, even if only for 30 seconds, because it does make a difference. So you're only limited of what is a small everyday act of inclusion to be present with someone. You're only limited by your imagination. But here are a couple of my favorite ones, right? We talked about starting a meeting with purpose and mission, those good commonalities rather than just jumping in. People like to feel connected to higher purpose and meaning, especially when they're busy. Why are we doing all this work, right? Oh, remind people there's a reason. I also like this one, just sprinkle in more often throughout the day this question, what do you think? You'd be sort of surprised what you kind of hear if you're asking. People like to be asked. They like to feel that their opinion matters. And who knows, you might learn something really cool. Never end a meeting without making sure everyone has had a chance to speak. And you know what, in your next one-on-ones, let people know what you appreciate about them. We don't communicate that enough at work. And sometimes that small little gesture can be the difference between someone feeling exhausted and dejected to feeling super engaged and energized. Pause there before I turn it over to you guys to do a little bit of work around this and apply some of these principles that we've talked about. Any questions so far? Bryce, anything coming in via chat?
It's been pretty quiet. I think you've got them entranced.
Well, that could be that I'm completely, I'm trying to simplify this. I hope it doesn't mean
No,
that
I will say,
overwhelmed.
just speaking personally, you put things in a way that make it, you know, coming from the world of academia and research and data, this makes it just so much more human and connectable in so many different ways for me. Just kind of understanding, you know, I loved your definitions of biases and how your brain just works to fill in those gaps with what it automatically knows. Just makes things just a little more understandable and within grasp, and in some ways a little less intimidating, I think, just for me personally. But
Oh, thanks, Bryce. Well, that was my intention, because again, part of it is if you want to make this sustainable in your organization, everyone needs to embrace these principles and feel that it's relevant to their day job, right? I mean, not everyone was hired to focus on this. They're hired to do their job that they are getting paid to do, and you want them to do it well. But embracing these principles helps them to do their job better. So, because everybody leads wherever they are in the organization. So I do try to make it relevant.
yeah, there's some comments in the chat about just really appreciating the ability to kind of take this, what feels like a huge topic, and break it into, you know, sort of practical steps, you know, kind of the little steps that you can take in your day-to-day to kind of, again, make it a little bit more accessible and realistic within the day-to-day.
Okay, well, thanks.
Gary, you have a question. Go right ahead and unmute.
Okay, yeah, just great talk, Beth. Thanks, great information. So I would say I'm a target person. Like I like knowing where we're going and when I'm there. And so on this issue, have you seen organizations use, like I know there's great stuff listening to people, hearing what they're saying individually. Have you ever seen any sort of measurement tools that an organization uses, and we're a small organization, to know you're implementing all the things that you're talking about? More science, I think, rather than the great interpersonal stuff you're talking about.
So there's 3 measurement tools. So the first one would be your own inclusive leadership self-assessment. So to know where you are, you know, on that continuum, get a baseline and then take it again in 12 months, because that is also going to be an indicator of, are you being more intentional in terms of setting the tone from the top? In terms of overall employee engagement, I use a culture of belonging survey that measures the 4 ingredients that are reflective of a cultural belonging. So one is leadership commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. The second is a feeling of comfort, again, not being fearful of being more of yourself at work. The third is connection to colleagues and also mission, vision, purpose. And then the fourth is, do you feel a sense of contribution? Your skills, perspectives, insights, experience matter. So there is an assessment that you can do, a survey. You can baseline, and I say take it 12 months after. And then ultimately, for me, when I'm working with clients, this work ends up with a strategic plan, right? So 3 years, what does better look like in your organization if you bring these principles to life? Like, get very clear. Does it mean that you're looking for more diverse representation at senior leader levels? Does it mean you're getting a higher degree of engagement? Those are sort of internal examples of metrics. But there's also external, right? Are we applying these principles to grow our market share in diverse communities? To have better impact on the families and the communities that we serve? Those would be the long-term outcomes, lagging indicators, as I call them, based uniquely on the organization's strategy. Then there's sort of the near-term, what's the work, the efforts, the initiatives that we're going to focus on, or the capabilities that we need to build out to get there. And then we can have unique metrics around those. So those are the 3 ways that you would measure it.
Anita, you had your hand up. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, thank you. Beth, thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted just to jump in because I know as a presenter, sometimes you feel like if you don't get, like verbal feedback, you might feel like, oh my gosh, am I hitting the market here? So I just wanted to say, yes, you are hitting the mark. And as a D&I instructor myself, I listened to your presentation and literally I was really delighted with even the new perspectives that you gave me. So this is very helpful. One thing I wanted to share, and you probably have heard, is the Harvard Implicit Association test, which is a real fun test. It's free online, and it gives you opportunities to try different ways to how you might be the blind spots, right? What are the blind spots? So it's really exciting test. So I would I can put in the chat because it's a really fun way to be open to what is coming back at us. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, thanks, Anita. I appreciate your feedback. And yes, thank you for mentioning that resource. And it'd be great if you could put it in the chat. Because the thing about implicit bias is we don't know that we have them. And frankly, a lot of times they go against our own stated and public beliefs, right? Of course, we don't think that. Well, you don't. I mean, it's unconscious. But yeah, those tests actually do bring a lot of awareness. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And well, I don't want to cut into Deidre's time because she's got great content. But what we're going to do now is we're going to literally in 5 minutes, each of you, we're going to break you off into breakout rooms in pairs, 2 of you at a time, to just reflect on these 2 questions, right? So what's your DEI why? Why does this work matter to you personally? Why, out of all the things that I talked about, would increasing your inclusive leadership skills be a good thing? And then what's just one everyday act of inclusion that you could think of to put into practice right away, later today? So Bryce, I'm gonna ask you, and actually, yeah, maybe take a picture of these questions so that you have them. I don't think I can share them in the breakout room. So your D&I why, what's one everyday act of inclusion you can put into practice right away? And then Bryce, if you want to go ahead and let's give everybody 4 minutes because then they really have 5 in the breakout room. I'll ask a few pairs to share or a few individuals to share when you.
All right. And we're off.
See you soon.
They're all filtering away.
There's always a few, Tammy.
And Tammy.
Sorry, guys, I lost my connection for a minute, so I missed what we were supposed to do.
That's all right. We'll actually shoot you some talking points in your room, but I want to make sure that you get there. So
okay.
We're putting you in a small group to talk about why D&I matters to you and what
Okay,
small everyday act of inclusion you could put into practice right away.
okay.
Great.
Um,
And you should be going soon. Did you get a, there she goes. Okay, so it's just us. We can gossip.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I don't want to run into Deidre's content. So
Oh, you're good. That was great.
up in 5 minutes. Maybe I might be just 1 or 2 minutes over 9:30.
So Beth, the questions are, what is your DEI why? And what was the other one?
An everyday act of inclusion that you can put into practice. Will those go in the breakout rooms?
I'm sending them messages
Okay.
now. Inclusion that you can. If I can type correctly. There we go. All right. So they're off. Deidre, thanks for joining us. Glad that you were able to pop in.
Yeah.
Once we kind of wrap up from the first half here, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction, and you should be able to share your screen, all of that. Now, we had talked at one point, did you want to use breakout rooms at all?
I'm not going to use breakout rooms. What I'm just
Okay.
going to do is kind of just talk to the group. And what I will do is encourage people to use either the reactions or put questions in chat while I'm talking, just to
Yeah.
make sure that everyone's tracking with the information I'm sharing.
Yeah, and I can help moderate that. I just noticed
Oh, awesome.
Megan had a question in the chat there, but they should have gotten the questions in their room. But yeah, I'll help moderate and kind of make sure that you don't have to split focus, all of that. So
Feel free to interrupt me anytime. You can get a question in the chat.
sure, no problem. They've got about a minute left. And so we'll just kind of hang out here. No, Beth, I think this.
Maybe one person to share one of each of those questions and then wrap it up.
Okay,
Turn
that's
it over.
great. We had a request for the slides, which we always get.
Yeah, okay. You have those, right?
Yeah, yep. And I'll make that available with the recording and all of that. So, which I'm not sure, are we actually getting, are we recording our chat here? I don't know how that works. I'll edit it.
I'd like to say, I've always thought so highly of Bryce.
Right? I'll edit it. Thank God I've got software here. I've this past year, I've learned how to be a real tech junkie just out of necessity.
You have to be.
Exactly. So it's kind of funny. That time is up. They've got a minute left.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to hear their responses. A couple of the groups be good.
Hopefully they did the assignment and they weren't talking about the weather.
The weather is nice today.
It's
nice. Gorgeous.
I'm running out after this. Is it?
It's very nice. It is hot.
Oh, it is?
It's nice.
Oh, it's 73 by me. Is it warmer by you?
I'm in Pewaukee. It is burning up out here.
Oh, the further away you get from the lake. Yeah.
Summer for a while.
Deidre, are you in the office? Or
no, I'm at home.
Okay.
Yeah, we're actually in the midst of a move at MRA, so I didn't want to risk you hearing drilling and noises.
Right, because you're moving next.
We're moving next door.
Yeah, I thought I saw that
next door officially Monday, so right now the office is crazy.
A mess.
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Not a far move, but is it gonna? Will the environment look very different, or just?
Oh yeah, it's gonna be totally different and modernized and
I'm gonna close the rooms so they are gonna start filtering back now.
Okay.
They have 60 seconds to get back here. So.
Awesome.
We've got people who are busy chatting in their rooms and not racing back into the big room. That's good. That's good. As long as they're talking about DEI and not gossiping, right?
Right. Oh, I like your background. Is it Levi?
Yes.
Nice.
You know, a bunch of volunteers painted that mural. I wasn't sure if putting the message right on the wall was the right thing or not, but we've gotten good feedback.
Wow, that's beautiful. Where is that?
It's at Friendship Circle in Fox Point.
Oh, nice.
Come and see it.
Yeah, very cool. I'd love more information. Well, welcome back, everybody. So just to wrap up, I'd be curious if maybe one or two want to share your D&I why, and if one or two want to share an everyday act of inclusion that you came up with. So anybody who wants to, I'm not going to call on anybody, but
I would share.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. You know what, the DEIY that my partner and I think agreed upon was that right now our country is so divided that our why is like literally really important. Like we have to somehow like keep our society together. We have to, like, it's the future of our society, I think, depends on this really important work that you're talking about and really understanding other perspectives. So thank you just for bringing that to the forefront today. And so it's not always having to tell your opinion, but really listening to other opinions. And we were kind of thinking about diversity in terms of like political polarization and that sort of thing. So yeah, so thank you. And I think the first thing we could do right away is like to start asking more questions and better questions when we're in conversation with people.
Oh, I really like that. And, you know, I feel like the workplace has an opportunity to be active in healing the country, because people that work, the citizens of the country show up at work. And so a lot of times our workplaces are the most diverse places, because, you know, it pulls from so many people. So if we could start at work, that certainly can't hurt. Yeah, thank you, Crystal. Thanks for sharing. One more person, anybody else, your why or one small act of inclusion you could put into practice right away.
I can say, Rosario nudged me. We were talking about collective liberation, and that ultimately this needs to go beyond like the business case for any one organization and be more about, you know, if we're going to thrive as a society, we really do need to dismantle all systems of oppression. So it's nothing other than the total overthrow of all of those systems of inequity, because, you know, go big or go home.
Wow, collective liberation. Nice. That would definitely be a lot of food for multiple conversations. You'll have to really practice those inclusive communication skills, I think, to bring people along in terms of that vision. But yeah, I like that. Go big. Go big. Mm-hmm. Well, what I want to do then is sign off and just let you know that I've got resources on my website to help you support your inclusive communication skills and everyday acts of inclusion as leaders. Oops, I don't know if I'm sharing my screen or not. I don't think I am. To keep in mind, so please visit my website, visit me on LinkedIn, reach out if you have any other questions, or if you feel like some of this content could be helpful within your own organization. And actually, before I sign off and hand it over to
Beth,
yes.
Could I sneak in just one really quick question? I put it in the chat box just around DEI, hiring, recruitment, and retention.
Yes.
Some of our organizations aren't seeing a ton of diversity in terms of staff or candidates for employment. What do you think around just strategies that you're seeing with other organizations that are maybe trying to create a talent pipeline or other strategies to recruit and retain diverse talent?
Really good question, Rosario. Thank you. So 2 things. First of all, your best source of talent are your current employees. If they're not ambassadors of your organization, and hopefully, you know, your talent within the company also has broader and perhaps some diverse networks. So I would just say first is just do this internal work. So you're actually creating a culture when you do bring in diversity that's not already represented in the organization. They're landing in a culture where these principles come to life more often than not. And when they do, hopefully your own employees will be a great source of talent and be able to feed that pipeline. But the other thing is, you know, I really do think, and this comes to applying an inclusive lens to decision making. I'm a big advocate for facilitating like a whole strategic planning session around your recruiting approaches, because chances are you're trying to recruit diverse talent with the same old approaches and not with an inclusive lens that rethought those approaches from a more empathetic mindset. Are you really thinking about what all steps of recruiting, from the actual job description itself, the criteria that you're looking for, where you're posting those descriptions, how you're interviewing? Are you looking at it from another lens? From the lens of the diverse talent that you want to include. I think until you do that, you're just trying to get a different outcome with kind of warmed over strategies. So those would be my responses to those questions. Yeah, great question.
Excellent. Thank you. I just love your ability to take these very complex topics around DEI and to just bring them into applicable, approachable steps that our leaders can take in their organizations. Thank you, Beth. I enjoyed your presentation today.
Thank you so much, Rosario. And thank you, everybody. It was an honor to spend the morning with you. Thank you again, Bryce. And I know Deidre's up next, but I think, Bryce, you might be introducing her. And Deidre
Absolutely.
and I go way back. I learned a ton from her. So
Thank you, Beth.
it's awesome that you'll spend time with her too. Bye, everybody.
And so with that, I want to thank you. Thank you, Beth, so much for your time. Just a reminder to everybody, we are recording it. You will get a link to the recording of today's presentation along with Beth's slides and all of the links and resources that we have been talking about today. And so with that, let's move on to phase 2. I want to take a moment and introduce Deidre Garrett. She is the Director of HR Services and Organization Development for MRA, the Management Association. She's an accomplished recruiting and HR professional with experience in the public and private sectors. She has experience in developing and implementing recruitment strategies that have improved operational outcomes and maximized profits. She also has extensive experience in human resource planning and operations and organizational change, team building, and facilitative leadership. Her varied career includes leadership positions in the staffing and nonprofit arenas where she's been responsible for recruiting, business development, leading teams, project management, multi-million-dollar profit and loss oversight, and training and development. So with all of that, we're thrilled to have her join us here today to talk about ways that we might kind of take some of what we've already learned and actually implement it within our organizations. So to some degree, picking up off of some of the questions that we were just talking about. So with that, welcome, Deidre. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Bryce. That was a really long bio. I hope that is not what I sent you. I'm sorry.
No, I created it myself. It's my fault, not yours. I just thought there was so much amazing information. I thought that's great. I want to include it all. So there you go.
No, I appreciate that. So I am really happy to have the opportunity to be with you all this morning. And as Beth shared, her and I go way back. So I am so excited that you got to kick off the morning with her this morning. I am going to take everything that she talked about and kind of step it up even further and talk about how you can build a dynamic DEI infrastructure. And I want to say this is super informal, so please feel free to put questions in the chat. I know Bryce is going to be monitoring, or use a reaction, raise your hand if you have a question about any of the information that I'm sharing today. So a lot of times when I speak with organizations, especially small organizations, or we're talking about nonprofits today, The confusion, or I would say the hesitation around developing a DEI infrastructure or strategy is kind of, where do we start? Many organizations obviously want to do the right thing. And from listening to you guys this morning, everyone has a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the challenge sometimes is, how do you begin in your DEI journey? How do you establish a plan? How do you know where to start? And DEI work involves the entire organization. So at times it's like, how do you pull everyone together? But the biggest piece of it, which I'm glad Beth hit on, is you need leadership commitment to make progress. So she talked about inclusive leadership skills, which I will hit on a little bit later today. So today, the three pieces that I really wanted to talk about is how to build your organization's DEI strategy, how to create a sustainable infrastructure, and then I want to go through some key recommendations. And I'm also going to share with you guys some personal stories about things that we did at MRA, but also just some examples of other clients that I've worked with and ways in which they've been able to cultivate their strategies. So how to start building your organization's DEI strategy. So firstly, you really want to identify why your organization wants to commit to DEI. And this is really because you want to ensure your organization is ready to begin on this journey. So there's many different reasons that organizations really want to commit to DEI. It's either because they want to cultivate a productive and engaging workforce. They want to get more diverse talent, as Rosario was just talking about. They want to create a better experience for their employees because they've received feedback, or because they just know that research shows that diverse teams lead to better outputs and increased productivity. But identifying the why is really going to help you define the how. So, and that's going to all tie into your organization's mission, vision, and values. So that goes into the second bullet. So how is that why going to connect to your organization's vision and values? And the third one, which I think is the most important, so I probably should have put it first, you really want to make sure that your senior leaders are committed to moving on this journey. If they're not committed, I would say it's really going to hinder your ability to move forward and have a lot of progression and success in getting everybody else on board. So the big thing that I like to say is collaborative discovery is really important when you talk about cultivating like your DEI infrastructure. So you really want to involve your employees because they are the ones who live and breathe your environment. They understand your culture. They understand, as I would say, kind of the isms of your environment. So it's always important to ask them what's going well within DEI. So if you had to define our environment, or I guess rate us on our ability to be inclusive and make employees feel as if they belong, what do you think is going well here? What are we doing really well? And then what are the challenges? Where are our roadblocks? What are things that we are missing? And then other questions is kind of, what are our top priorities? What are the things that you think should be addressed? And then what should the structure look like, or what would work best? So one organization that we worked with, and I should tell you, we did not work with them on this specific strategy, but we work with them on many different areas, whether it's training, recruiting, et cetera. But one organization that we work with, I like the strategy they took, because what they decided to do is ask these questions to all of their employees. And what they found is, while they had a lot of diverse talent within their organization from a ethnicity standpoint, they did not have a lot of females in leadership. And that was something that came up over and over and over when they surveyed employees, when they talked with employees and had breakout groups, listening sessions, et cetera. So they decided that that was going to be their specific focus for their first thing that they were going to tackle as far as their DEI structure, right? So that is how they determined what they were going to do next. And I always recommend that you ask your employees, because they're going to give you the best feedback as to what is the first step that you need to take. Sometimes DEI can be really overwhelming. And it's like, how do you tackle everything, or where do you start, or what's going to get you the best impact, or what's going to really drive the needle? And first, it's really honing in on what is it that your employees need. There's a lot of different ways in which you can find what your employees need. So you can use listening sessions and host them. whenever you'd like, or I know some organizations do town halls and kind of open it up to the employees to allow them to share feedback. You can do employee surveys. Beth talked about that. So there's various cultural engagement surveys that you can send to employees to get their feedback. Or you can even have roundtable discussions. We've also had clients who just have their CEO or senior leaders literally just say, this is a roundtable, which is similar to a listening session, and I'm just going to host it for an hour, and I will be on this Zoom call, and you let me know what your feelings are about our DEI efforts within the organization, and whether you really feel like we're meeting the mark, and what do you feel like we're missing. So there's many different ways in which you can survey your employees or speak to them about what their thoughts are. So when we talk about creating a sustainable infrastructure, there's many different things that obviously are embedded into that, but I wanted to focus on the key things that kind of come to mind to make sure that you're creating something that is not just sustainable, but feasible and realistic, because I know many of you have smaller organizations. So how do you make it successful and really make it something that's meaty that people can grab onto? So the first one is you want to really make DEI goals and your work actionable, measurable, and evidence-based, which I know everyone's heard of SMART goals, but you really want to put goals to that. So if it's to, as I mentioned, there was a client that we worked with that wanted to increase their females in leadership. They created a goal that they wanted to have 5 women in top leadership roles by, I think it was like 2025, something like that. So they actually put an actual goal to it because they want to hold themselves accountable. So goals should be concrete and measurable, but they should also be something that's attainable. The other thing is you want to elevate your DEI work internally. So again, you want to have senior leadership support, but they should be really spearheading these efforts, because if they are leading it, it's much easier to get employees on board. What I've found, which actually I think a lot of people don't realize, is in many companies, they're assuming that employees are not really involved or engaged in many different activities outside of work, or they assume that employees do not have strong cultural competence, but in fact, they actually have sometimes stronger cultural competence than leaders do, and they're involved in many different things in their community. So you may find just within your organization that some employees were just waiting for somebody to say, yes, this is what we're doing, and they are just raring to go, and they have many ideas and many different things they can contribute. But the other piece is we want to make sure that there's a budget and resources provided to address the DEI issues, because we can't just say, these are the things we want to do, but then there's no support provided, because again, then that becomes a burden for whoever is actually doing the work. And the other piece, when I talked about goals, transparency is really important. So just for example, for our organization at MRA, we have a DEI council that we created. And just giving you guys some background for the DEI council, how we came about to developing that is we are an organization where we do not have a lot of diversity within the organization. So we could not create a ERG, so to speak, or an affinity group. So what we decided to do is develop a DEI council and it's honestly from employees to leaders at all levels who are on the council. And we got together and we actually formed structure, charter, bylaws, et cetera. But also part of our process is we will be providing an annual report. So the goals that we set forth, we're actually going to report out on that at the end of the year to the employees because we're responsible to them. And we were saying we were going to do X, Y, and Z. So we actually want to report that out to everyone. And the last piece here is requiring leaders and managers to participate in DEI-based training. So a lot of times, many organizations are sending leaders to do check the box training, which is like unconscious bias, which is a great training. But how can we dig a little bit deeper to make sure that it's behavior-based training? So I like that Beth mentioned, I think she didn't mention the exact title, but on her slide where she talked about inclusive leadership skills and developing that, and she talked about on the spectrum of 5 different things, and the last one was adaptation. So what she's referring to there is the intercultural development inventory, because it's a really long name. It's called IDI, and it's an assessment. And I know she's certified in it. We also have 3 professionals at MRA who are certified in providing the assessment, but also providing the coaching as a result of the assessment. And the reason why I bring that up is because when we talk about developing leaders as far as developing their cultural competence, one of the things that I found is IDI is really helpful. So just to tell you guys our personal story. So at MRA, we actually have leaders who have gone through that this year. So everyone took the individual assessment. And what we did is we met with a coach to review our assessment results, which were completely confidential. But what we're also doing is combining all of them, because part of the IDI, which is nice, is you can combine the assessment results to put a leadership your leadership on a spectrum to see if you have a leadership team of 5 or 6 people, to see kind of where do you guys fall on the spectrum as a whole, which is nice to see because then it helps you learn where you guys need to go as an organization. So that's just one of the tools that you can use to kind of help leaders develop that cultural competence. But also I think it's important to make sure that you're opening the doors for them to attend training, et cetera. And the other one is you want to identify leaders and non-managerial employees to serve as DEI sponsors. Again, you may find that there are employees who are really, really interested in the world of DEI, or they're really engaged with Special Olympics or other organizations that are focused around helping people with hidden or visible disabilities, or helping people who are disenfranchised, or anything like that. So you may find that there are employees who are really interested, and this would be a great developmental opportunity for them. So I would say and encourage you to really identify them. And then the last one is you want to treat your DEI work as core versus peripheral. So what I mean by that is it really needs to be embedded in your day-to-day expectations, your day-to-day work, and how your organization moves forward. So whether that's including it in your performance evaluations, or it's including it in your, I say KPIs, anything, if you guys have quarterly meetings, people have quarterly meetings with their leaders, it's including that in that conversation. So then it just becomes like an everyday expectation that employees know this is something that's just embedded in our culture and it's expected of everyone. So really quickly, I feel like I gave everyone a lot of information. I will stop there. Any questions?
Deidre, I have a question. This is Rosario. I love your point about treating this as DEI as a strategic initiative and making sure that you're allocating funds for it. And Beth talked to the notion of the roadmap. And then right here, something that struck me on this current slide that you have up about including it as a in-performance evaluation, my brain immediately jumped to, wow, okay, well then how am I even going to measure that to hold an employee accountable to it? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will tell you, we are still working through that at MRA. What I have seen work successfully at some of our clients is, to be honest, they're starting more so with the leadership, them being held accountable for their annual performance reviews. So it's like a part of their, it's either a part of their bonus structure or it's just a part of their expectations. And now it's been added to their job description as far as their duties and responsibilities. So that's what I've seen has worked thus far, because then leadership is held accountable for really driving it forward in the organization. The other thing is, if you have a developmental goal for employees, this is a great one just to add on there, meaning if employees choose to be a part of a DEI group or committee that you create, which I'll be talking about next, then it's something that they can put down for their developmental goal. Like they've met that goal, they've achieved that, if that makes sense. Does that help?
Yes, thank you. Great answer.
So, and again, I do want to make sure that I am hitting this note. I don't want to make it seem like it's just CEOs and senior leaders that need to develop their cultural competencies. It is important that you have some other champions and people who are going to come alongside and help drive towards those DEI initiatives within the organization. But I know there's a lot of younger employees and people who are passionate about DEI who are always looking for opportunities to help their company. So I think kind of bringing them alongside with you to do that work is obviously going to help you be even more successful. So, hi, Anita.
Hi, Deidre. As you're speaking, since we are a collection of nonprofit agencies, I'm also interested in how this work or how this conversation will also be translated to boards of directors. So as we are thinking through this, this is outside of the scope of the conversation today, but it would be a really interesting next level, right? What are the concepts that have been presented to us today? How can we integrate those concepts in terms of how we seek boards of directors, members for that leadership level in our organization? So just thought to bring that up as a future.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I can touch on that just for a second, because this is one of our initiatives for our DEI Council actually at MRA. And one of the things I think sometimes gets lost, because it is super overwhelming sometimes, if you are really trying to go after diverse candidates, then it seems like a race and you're trying to get 3 to 5 people on the board just because you want to diversify the board, right? But you want to make sure your intention is the right place, it's in the right place, but also making sure that it makes sense for the board. So I think it's always good to not just look at getting people of color on the board, which I think is very important, but diversifying for gender as well, but then also looking at it from a business perspective. So what I mean by that is, what I had just shared, like within our organization, is maybe we can look at also getting organizations who help people who are in a certain category of society that we are not really addressing or helping as right now. So just for instance, like an organization who, again, helps people with hidden or visible disabilities. Or we recently did and it's recorded so I can share because we don't typically share our members, but like Good Friend is a member of MRA or a client of MRA, and they help with autism awareness. So they do a lot of that great work, and they also help people with hidden disabilities as well. So wouldn't it be great if we had them on our board? Because now they're not just leveraging what we currently do at MRA, but they're elevating the knowledge of the other people on the board. Now we can also enhance the work that we do. So I think it's having a holistic strategy, because a lot of times people just look to have various organizations, if that makes sense, because they have the notoriety or the brand name, et cetera, in the community. So it's like, let's have them in. But what about those who are really making an impact in the community and they could add some value? So that's what I would say to that.
So Deidre, we do have a couple of questions in the chat I just want to bring up.
Sure, go ahead.
One is, obviously we have a large nonprofit audience here today. So when you're dealing with a board of directors, are they considered senior leadership and therefore should go through some of the same trainings and develop those cultural competencies? And then also, what are your general thoughts on mandated DEI training?
Those are great questions. And I'm gonna have to think through it really quick. I'm gonna think back to my junior achievement days. So I would say, and this is my opinion, not MRA's, I would say if your organization is at a stage in your journey where you are really trying to, and when I say go all in with both feet, we are committing to DEI, it makes sense to have the board members participate in some type of cultural competency training. Now, it does not have to be at the same level or depth as those who are leading the nonprofit organization, but I do think there does need to be some awareness. And the reason why I say that is because many times when we have boards, they are so passionate about the mission and vision of the organization. But also now, if part of your mission and vision is including DEI and you've decided to make a statement, you've now added that as part of your mission for the organization, it's on your website, it's like a statement you are making, then the board members cannot just sign on and say, yep, I'm committed to that. They really need to understand what that means and be able to articulate it. But then also DEI is a continual growing and learning process. I'm still learning every day. So it's challenging your board members to learn because it's elevating what you already do within your organization, and that's only going to help you. So as far as the second question, for a lot of times when we have DEI mandated training, again, it goes back to, we're going to send 5 people to unconscious bias. So I would say the challenge with that is people do training, they check it off, and then that's pretty much it. The best way that I've seen it done when you talk about DEI training and Anita, you may have some thoughts as well, is creating immersive experiences for employees. So what I mean by that is they're not just attending the training, but when they get back from the training, we're going to have a talk about it. So we're going to talk about what you learned, how can you apply this, and we're going to have touch bases. So whether it's we're having a monthly meeting, quarterly meeting, et cetera, we're including it in our conversation with our leaders versus they just went and may check the box and then they were done. I do think if you open it up where this is what we're trying to do as an organization and what we're passionate about around DEI, and these are the things that we are looking to offer from a developmental standpoint, and not everyone has to go take this training by the end of the month, which it's not fun, it's not exciting. It also doesn't make people want to be interested and engaged. I think it's just creating, again, an engaging experience for employees to really learn and understand. But also what Beth had shared is helpful. You want people to really find what it is that what's their connection to DEI, right? So when you're presenting it to employees, it's not like we're doing DEI training, so figure out what it is or figure out your unconscious bias so you can be better, like anything like that. It's more so what is it that they feel they could learn more about. There are specific areas within DEI that some people feel like I've never, like when we hosted a program at MRA about hidden disabilities, people said, I just never even thought about it because I don't have anybody in my family, around me, or anyone I know who is either autistic or deals with any of these disabilities. So I just didn't realize it. So a lot of it is just awareness. And what the one thing I thought about this morning, just as you guys were in your breakout groups, is there's kind of 3 ways which influence the way in which we think about things when we think about culture. So the first is community, and that's the way in which we grow up. And obviously nothing can change with that because it's just how you grow up, right? But that shapes kind of your worldview. But the second is work. And at many times, and we're challenged with, we kind of stay into our own silos and we kind of just do what we need to do and we go home. And the third is life. And many times, again, we're not challenging ourselves to step outside our box, meet new people, new friends who don't look like us and have totally different upbringings. So you guys have control, I would say more so obviously over the second piece, the workplace. So how can we create, again, immersive experiences for employees to learn about things they're typically not exposed to, learn about new people, and really advance their skills or their knowledge, whereas they would not be challenged to do that because typically they're just coming to work to do work. So how can you create those experiences for people?
That's great. I took away a lot from that. I appreciate that. One other question, and this ties into some of the things we discussed in the first session, are ideas or strategies for creating diverse talent pipelines and what they might be, but also what are the pros and cons of that approach?
Yeah, I'm big on creating diverse talent pipelines because I think the more diversity you have, from age, gender, ethnicity, you name it, just your workplace is better. You're getting more insight and input from people who have different backgrounds and thoughts. And the world of work is changing. It used to be you want to find somebody that fits within your organization, and now it's let's find people who we can help them feel like they belong here, and they're going to do a great job. But how can we welcome them and make them feel like they belong? So I would say there's many different, and I can send out some sites to you later, Bryce, but there's many different sites like Jockwell, Color Careers. There's like 6 others I just saw that are just popping up that help organizations find diverse talent. And even at MRA, so we have a recruiting services portion of our business. And now we have had, I don't know, like 10% of our recruiters now have their certification in diversity recruiting. And the reason for that is obviously because many organizations need someone who is solely focused on developing a diversity talent pipeline for them. I would say it's something, if you have somebody who is doing the recruiting or you're doing the recruiting, it's really finding that partner or finding that job board or connection that you can make so you can really get the best talent that you need. I think it's always great to have that pipeline, but it's also great to have your branding on point so people understand, again, what your organization is about. Many candidates, I've been interviewing because I'm hiring like crazy at MRA, but I just interviewed like 3 people this week, and all of them asked, what are we doing around DEI? So that's like the major question nowadays when people take a job. What are you doing? What's your organization's commitment to the community? Those are questions I have not typically gotten in previous years, but that is a qualifier for many people who are looking for jobs now. So you need to be able to effectively communicate what your organization is doing around it. And it doesn't have to be that you're so far in your journey. It just has to be, this is what we're doing right now initially to start. So I think it's always good to develop that pipeline. But again, you can ask, and even if you guys need resources, you can reach out to me and I can send some resources to you, and even connect you with a recruiter at MRA who does it on a regular basis, just so they can give you some tips and tools.
Yeah, that would be great. We'll have Deidre's contact information at the end for everybody to connect to, and we'll make sure that you get that in a follow-up email as well. And if you could, forward on the list of sort of diverse recruiting sites, that would be fantastic. I would love to help kind of lift that up and spread the word. But all right, there's a comment about the value of posting salary ranges on job descriptions. That I completely agree. That's a very, very strong topic. I want to make sure that we discuss it, but I also want to make sure that we're not sort of hijacking your presentation.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I will say nowadays it is so competitive, and I know you guys hear this all the time. 2020 was competitive for talent, but 2021 is a whole new game. We have there's so many different professionals, and you guys probably see this on LinkedIn. People change jobs so frequently. Sometimes it's kind of like a head spin. And I think it's because there's so much competition for talent nowadays. And even when I speak to clients, when we speak frankly, it's like sometimes you have to think about it. Is my job really going to be super hard? So if I'm talking to a manufacturer, for instance, and you want to pay $12 an hour, just so you know, somebody can stand at Quick Trip literally all day and not do grueling labor work for $15 an hour, and they're just ringing people up. And it's much easier of a job. So I am an advocate for putting the pay in your job postings, but I'm also an advocate for sharing what's great about your organization and what you're doing. And again, what are you doing around DEI? Because everybody isn't necessarily nickel and diming, like looking at, oh, I'm going to take this job because it's 25 cents more. I think it's just looking at the whole package. So if this organization, the job looks really attractive, I look at your website and there's diversity. I look at your board and there's diversity. I also look and see some of the great things that you guys have been doing or posting on social media, et cetera. And then I see the pay that works for me, then they will be interested, right? So it's kind of like a whole package, but I will say, to make it more competitive nowadays, a lot of businesses have been posting pay because then they get people to apply quicker.
And I know that there are some jobs boards out there that require it now. There's kind of this move that is in that entire arena where it's becoming more expected or more hoped for, at least. So I think individual organizations can kind of weigh what they have most to make it offer, but to make it appealing to a candidate. But I also, and I just lost my train of thought, so never mind.
Well, I was going to say in that same note, there are some, I think it's Glassdoor, and there's another one that's escaping me. They're now rating businesses on their on DEI, right? Based upon the reviews of employees who've worked there, based upon kind of what you have out there. So then if I'm looking for a job, I can go see what your rating is, like while you're posting something. So that's why I said earlier when I talked about the board, all of it has to come together in a nice package. And I know that sounds so daunting, but it all has to make sense for a job applicant, right? So if you're committed to DEI, what are you doing about it? What does your board look like, et cetera? And again, if you can explain that in an interview, this is what we're doing about it. This is our strategy for the next 2 to 3 years. we're going to diversify our board, we're trying to diversify our talent, increase it by 25% or whatever. Again, that's where the SMART goals come in. So you can put metrics to it, but also holding people accountable. I think that helps.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that we started a DEI council at MRA, and I know some of our other clients have started DEI councils or groups or committees, et cetera. So someone actually needs to own the work that you're going to put forth. So that's why I say you need to provide, you need to form a group to provide oversight and track progress. So somebody has to be responsible for it, but it's also important to make sure that there's a senior person in the organization who's kind of advising that group. And again, this group can be from many different departments across your organization. It can be employees and leaders at all levels. So there doesn't have to be like a strict rule as to who can be on it. It's just more so dedication to driving your DEI strategy forward. But you obviously want to make sure that it fits with your organization's mission, vision, and values. Because just because it's a DEI strategy, it may not, all the objectives that you've identified may not fit or work for your organization. So what is that you want to move forward? And I talked about identifying metrics earlier, but you want to tie everything that you've identified to metrics. And I think it's important to, you can, as I spoke earlier, we have a client who identified their women's council because that was something that was important for their organization. So you can create a group or a committee, however you want to define it, that drives a specific initiative. And it doesn't have to be something overarching. It can be something very specific because that's where you decide to start. Or you can create an ongoing group that partners with leadership to support just the organization's overall DEI efforts. So for instance, our DEI council is looking at everything. And then we broke the DEI council into 3 subcommittees so we could get more work done in a quicker amount of time, I should say. But in general, your group or committee is going to be focused on your culture. So what are those things, again, that your employees mentioned that they see as issues or challenges within your organization? So this group or committee is going to help drive those things forward and really put meat to those specific goals. And really, they're the ones coming up with the strategies as well. So for instance, for our organization, the council is, like I said, broken up into subcommittees so we could actually get the work done. But then we're submitting those strategies to our senior leadership. So these are the things that we would like to see done. This is the timeline. This is who needs to be involved, et cetera. And getting their buy-in, their input, their approval so we can move forward with those things. And honestly, it can look like a lot of different things as well, because you can have objectives. Some of your objectives could be developing and implementing a DEI leader training program for your organization. So that could be something you want to do, or an employee awareness program. It could also be actively using your affirmative action plan, right, to leverage that. It could also be making sure that you're collaborating with internal HR to diversify your talent base. So again, putting a metric to that. You want to diversify your talent, whether it's the entire organization or at the leadership level, by a certain percentage in a certain year. Or you notice there's a department that has no diversity, or there's a key critical role that should be a diverse candidate, and you want to fill that with a diverse candidate by a certain date, right? So putting some of those things out there as well. And what I wanted to do is outline some of these questions, because I think it's important to understand how to move forward when you're developing that DEI group or committee. So really, what is the purpose of the group, right? What are the roles of the members in the group? Does everyone have a specific role? Does everyone know what their marching orders are, their responsibility is, et cetera, and the time that should be spent? And what are the group objectives that I just talked about? And then what is the structure and the guidelines? Are we going to do it more formal, where it's bylaws and a charter, or is it casual? Who oversees it? Who's responsible and accountable for driving this forward? And then how will the group achieve its goals and when? One of the things I laid out here, because this is kind of our pathway to progress that we used at MRA, is we came up with our goals and objectives. and then as a DEI council, but then we came up with a business plan for what we were going to propose. But then the other essential piece was coming up with a communications plan, right? Because you want to make sure that you're effectively communicating everything you're doing along the way internally to employees, because obviously transparency is key, so that people understand we didn't just form a committee to have fun. It's not just a social group. We're actually doing something to drive this forward. Now, I should say there are organizations that create ERGs that are more social, which is completely fine. But again, that's not at the beginning of the DEI journey. That's kind of once everything is really fully established and fleshed out. So now we can develop affinity or ERGs, affinity groups, or ERGs for specific groups of our population. And then the last step is the assessment plan. So how are we going to assess whether we were successful or not, right? So ours is more so going to be an employee survey to see where we landed. Again, I talked about providing the annual report, but we want to assess like what we did. What's our grade, right? We said we were going to do these 6 things this year. Where do we land? What were the results? How do our employees feel? Do they feel like it's a more engaging and inclusive environment? Do they feel like they can just show up and be themselves every day at work? And do they also feel like they are even more of an ambassador for the organization? Like, are they excited to share with people that they work at our organization and recruit people to our organization? Because that's a big piece of it as well. So the key recommendations I have for you guys today is really, the first thing is you want to support the ideas, thoughts, and work conducted. So again, that's through getting the commitment from senior leadership. And again, you want to provide opportunities for leaders to develop their cultural competence, because you can't, if you don't have leaders who understand where their opportunities are, it will be really hard to get their arms around where the organization's opportunities are as well, to kind of move forward so that you're progressing. And then I talked about asking your employees input about DEI opportunities, and so they feel like they belong. So do you know what your employees feel like is a gap? Or do you know what your employees would say if somebody asked them, do you feel like you have an inclusive environment at our organization? And then the other one is building an organization-wide infrastructure. Again, it cannot just be the senior leadership or the board of directors who are driving this. It has to be all of the employees, but it has to be explained to them the whys. Why are we doing this? Why do we think this is pivotal and crucial for our organization? Why is this even crucial for our mission, right? To even drive forward and for our organization to continue to have impact. And the last one is you want to review your DEI structure annually. So even if you start with, like I said, you can start with a group around a specific initiative. If you start with a small DEI committee, or even if your building year is just, we're going to talk about what we want to do next year, but these are the things that we want to try to commit to, and these are the goals and objectives that we've set. Make sure you're reviewing that to really hold yourselves accountable, evaluate it, evaluate the impact, and evaluate whether it's kind of moved the needle within your organization as well. So key things to remember is making your DEI plan a leadership-led initiative. It really enhances credibility, generates awareness, and promotes broad support across the organization. And also, as I said, creating a committee for all of your DEI related activity, it's efficient and effective, right? So whether it's a group, a committee, a council, then you have a dedicated group to really be responsible for pulling together those objectives, being responsible for communication. And if you want to have regular events that you offer for employees, et cetera, they are responsible for pulling all of that together. But just remember, you're providing them with an opportunity to cultivate new skills. You're providing them with an opportunity to enhance their cultural competence. You're providing them with an opportunity to really feel like they have a say in what's going on within the organization, which is great from an engagement standpoint. And then also other employees can see that you're really moving the needle. So even if they're not a part of the committee, they know there are employees who are really advocates for them, so to speak, to really drive it forward. And again, as I said before, it's important to remember that leaders can guide, teach, and serve as an example, but they can't do it by themselves, right? It has to be everyone committed to driving it forward. because it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that it's an inclusive environment. And if you continue to stay focused on that, it'll be even easier when you bring in new people, because the goal is obviously always for you to focus on the people who are currently at your company, right? Firstly, how can I create an inclusive environment for everyone who's here? Because that's going to create a foundation for new employees and people that we bring into the organization. And they will feel even more comfortable with being who they are and showing up to be themselves. And also it helps not just with retention, but like I said, engagement. And engagement is huge now, because as we talked about, the competition for talent is definitely real. And employees really, a lot of times you will find there are so many employees, as I shared earlier, who either are connected to a certain group, a certain, I want to say like cause outside of the organization, and you may not even know. And I know I even found out when we recently, so our first session we did was on autism, and our next one is going to be about LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace. And after our first session, I learned from different people that I don't typically interact with in other divisions that they had autistic children, right? So this really touched them. I think it hit something in them that made them think like, this is great that my organization is really focused on this, because this is something that I deal with every day and it's a challenge, but it's nice to see that other people understand it and are really trying to learn and again, enhance their knowledge. So you want to create, again, those immersive experiences for employees, because everyone, as I said, the number 2 thing is work. So everyone spends like most of their time at work. So how can we create those experiences for employees so that we are opening their minds to other people, other ways in which people have lived, just other experiences that they typically would not be exposed to, because most times in life, we don't step out of our comfort zones and we're not meeting with people who we typically would not meet with. It's just because we're comfortable. So, yeah.
Well, there's a question in the chat that I think is really valuable to this particular group when we're talking about initiating all of the things that we've just been discussing, particularly with, say, a small organization or an organization that's just starting a DEI process. Where do you start? And what kind of a time commitment can they expect to take? I mean, what are some of the kind of the basic, I mean, I guess the basic footsteps, first steps that you want to take that you would suggest?
Yeah, that's where I would go back to surveying your employee base to see where you need to start. Okay. Because you can say, I want to start with creating an inclusive environment, but like, what does that mean? So some organizations, it may be, we need more diverse talent. That's going to come up over and over again from employees. Okay, so then that's something that we want to tackle. And that's something that we're going to put a strategy around. And maybe it could be, we're going to make an investment and have someone help us with this, or we're going to use a resource and we're going to have somebody internally who's going to support us with this. We're going to send them to a training. So now they can help us be more aware and be more intentional about our diverse recruitment efforts. So it's really identifying where you need to start first, I would say, and then putting a strategy around that, and then assigning a measurable, actionable goal. So it's you're driving somewhere, and then again, making sure you're communicating that internally to employees so they know what you're working on.
And then in terms of a sort of an overall time commitment.
So time commitment is hard, because I will say sometimes, especially nowadays, because DEI is like the buzzword, right? We want to rush and we want to do everything. And there is really, it's very real to say you could really focus on a lot of things around DEI, but be focused on the wrong things and miss the boat, right? So that's why I think it's important to survey your employees and slow down, digest the information, and figure out what you can really tackle, what's feasible, what makes sense. And again, what's really aligned with your mission and what's going to help you drive that impact. Because first, your DEI strategy, yes, it's internal, but it also flows into external impact as well. So I say slow down and really focus on what you can do this year. We used at MRA, our first year was our building year. So we literally did not do anything that first year, right? We built that year. The next year, that's when we started rolling everything out and internal communication. And then from there, we continued to build. So give yourselves time and space to build, because if you have a stronger foundation and an actual strategy and a plan, that's going to help the longevity of it. If you kind of rush into something, that's when it kind of fizzles out. And the other thing is, the reason why I say you want to slow down with the timeline is just making sure that you have the right people on board, because some people want to sign up because it's like exciting, but they really don't have passion for it or commitment for it. And you really want to get the people in your organization who are really dedicated to doing it, because the work that we're doing, this is people outside of their job at MRA, right? So this is after hours. So this has to be somebody's passion and their interest in really helping drive this forward, because we're still in this building stage.
And so with an organization that's in the hiring process, what are your thoughts on sort of getting a clear focus on how your candidates are going to carry out that organizational goal or be a part of that kind of mindset?
That's a great question. So we actually added a question on our interview screening, I guess, template or whatever we use at MRA around DEI. And specifically for my divisions, I added 2 questions around that. And I can't think of them verbatim, but paraphrasing, one of them is around what have you done to contribute to DE&I efforts within your last organization or even current organization if they're still working there. And then I also asked, like, where, I'm trying to think where they feel like they are on the spectrum. So when we talk about cultural competence, it can go all the way up to adaptation. So where do they feel like they're super comfortable speaking about different topics? Do they have experience in them, et cetera? Because I'm interviewing HR professionals who act as HR consultants for us, since I'm over the HR services division. So I need to know which areas they're comfortable with. And then I think another question that we ask just in our recruiting department is more so around not just the positions they've recruited for, but communities, various communities they're familiar with, demographics of those communities. Have they ever come up with have they ever conducted, a talent strategy assessment specifically around DEI? So those types of things. But typically it's asking, what have they done in their last organization, right? What was their commitment to it? What were they involved with? And I even think, I don't ask people directly, like, what do you do in your free time type thing, but I always ask people what motivates them, what motivates you for work, kind of what drives you. And that also sometimes pulls out people's personal things that they like. So whether it's my family and I have a child, or I'm a caregiver of a parent who has this, so this is important to me. So you kind of know where their head is at. Or in my free time, because I asked, what are the things that really drive you? In my free time, I love to commit to this cause. So that's where I think you can kind of pull out some of that information.
Oh, I'm muted. That's great. Thank you. We are winding down here in the final moments, and I'm assuming that your slide presentation is done or near done. Is that correct?
It is. It is.
Okay.
It's just my information in the last slide.
That's great. Okay, cool. Well, we don't want to miss that, because we definitely want to know how to get in touch with you afterwards. But I think, as we kind of wind down here, and we've got, we're at time, so I obviously feel free to pop out if you need to go to another meeting. I've got another one myself coming up here shortly, but I'm curious to hear, and this was a suggestion from Rosario, what are you, from the audience, from our leaders, what are some of your key takeaways? I'm kind of curious to hear some of the big points that you're going to take back to your workplace and to your lives, and just to hear your thoughts. Or not. It's very quiet.
Or maybe just stick them in the chat box. It's always just so interesting to hear back from our leaders. This was a big topic. Folks were really excited about DEI. And Deidre, thank you so much. This was an amazing presentation. I was just firing, all these questions were coming to me as you were delivering today. They're rich content. I'm assuming everyone will get your slides too, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. And so just wondering if folks wanted to just pop something in the chat box, something that might have stood out in your mind or that you'll be taking away today? Yeah, and Bryce, I see some already popping in
There's
there.
some already. Integrating DEI into performance management, into all areas of the work, into self-evaluation. I think there's some really useful information today that we can kind of take back, both as individual leaders, but then also looking at sort of organizational structure and strategy and incorporating it sort of more globally within the organization. And how to find funding for this. That's always an issue. That's always going to be an issue. So this is great. Like I said, I don't want to keep anybody over time. Deidre, I really appreciate you joining us. This has been really, really valuable and a lot of food for thought. And I'm kind of thinking about it within my own offices and within our own structure. There's all kinds of things going on where I work already, but how can we kind of bring this home and into our immediate workplace is always a interesting challenge and conversation. So thank you everybody for joining us. I'm gonna kind of wind things down here. I'm gonna stop the recording now.